Let's talk.
Giles Brown.
I've got my first guest of the week on, and I was looking forward to this immensely. Mad Tom's Rising, the revolutionary mystic Sir William Courtenay, and the last battle fought on English soil. It's a fascinating time, and I, as you know, am a history nut, and I knew nothing about this, but the one man who does, and he is the author of Mad Tom's Rising, is Ian Breckon. Ian, good morning to you, sir.
Good morning, Giles.
Good to have you with us. Explain a little bit about what period. This is the Victoria. I thought this was going to be sort of, Wat Tyler, Richard II's peasants' uprising, but no, it isn't. It's much later. And explain to me a little bit about the background, please.
Yeah, so we're in the early 19th century. This is the 1830s, so it's kind of just after the period of Jane Austen, just at the beginning of Dickens. It's, in fact, the first year of the reign of Queen Victoria, so we are into the Victorian period. But it's a period which I suppose most people would feel is quite familiar. We know it from TV dramas and that kind of thing, adaptations of Austen. That's what makes this, in a way, so peculiar, because you have this quite familiar, in a way quite comfortable scene. We're in rural England, the heartland of Kent, and in the middle of all this, you have this explosion of extraordinary violence and bizarre fanaticism.
But you see, the thing is, all those Sunday evening or Sunday late afternoon tea time adaptations, that's for for the rich and privileged classes who just go to each other's houses for tea if they're not emerging from ponds with their shirts dripping. And obviously, post Napoleonic War, there's been huge struggles in England. We've had the agrarian revolution, we've had the beginnings of the industrial revolution. It's this is a time that has really upset an awful lot of people, to put it mildly, and so. Away from the stately homes, there is trouble in country, as the saying goes.
Oh, absolutely, yes. I mean, it was a period of enormous turmoil, and this is what, as you say, is kind of missing from a lot of the popular appreciation of this era, I think. We've got, first of all, the swing riots in the 1830s. This was the agricultural labourers roaming around the countryside, destroying machines, setting hay ricks on fire, threatening farmers. Then we have the whole turmoil of the Reform era, which was going through Parliament at this time, the various Reform Acts trying to enlarge the electorate. And this caused huge rioting around the country. Half of Bristol was burned down at one point. And then after that, the introduction of the new Poor Law, which again led to rioting in the countryside districts, and particularly this area of Kent, where we later find this figure, Sir William Courtenay, as he called himself, appearing.
And the thing that we don't think about, again, because if your entire history of the period comes from, Vanity Fair or those aforementioned Sunday tea time dramas, is religion and spiritualism, because we talk about people getting into various forms of spirituality and religion, but again, with the New World Order, there are people saying we should abandon the old ways, we should go back to the old ways. What are the old ways and what are the new ways? And this is again what Mad Tom sort of chows into, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. I mean, this was a tremendously religious age, the 1830s, the period sort of after the Napoleonic Wars, as you say, was a period of religious revivalism. And a lot of the ideas that people held as mainstream at that time might seem to us now quite extraordinary. The idea of the approaching millennium, for example, the return of Jesus Christ to earth to bring about the reign of the saints. I mean, these were really kind of coming to the forefront of people's minds. And this is what this man, Sir William Courtenay, John Nichols Tom, was tapping into, yeah, as you say.
And so where's he from and how? Because we've always had people, in the corner of the field going, follow me, I am the new Messiah. But he's originally from Cornwall, isn't he? And that's his background. That's
right, yeah. He was born in St. Column Major in Cornwall. He spent most of his life down in Truro as a fairly ordinary wine merchant until he was about 30, just after the age of 30, when he suddenly disappeared. He kind of did a flit from his family home, disappeared for a few months or so, and then turned up sometime later in Canterbury under a new name and a completely different guise.
And so what is so special about him that he attracts people to follow him, and not only follow him, but to take part in a mid-19th century peasants' revolt?
Yeah, well, he was tremendously charismatic. I mean, he was a very unusual-looking man. He was 6 foot tall, very broad, tremendously strong, and he had very long hair, which is unusual at the time, and also a very big beard, which was very unusual at the time. A lot of people likened him to Jesus, who I think was the only other long-haired, bearded man that they knew of at the time. But he was also a great speaker, and this is one of the mysteries about him. Where did he gain this tremendous skill in oratory? He could stand in front of crowds of people and give these speeches drawing on biblical texts, but also using humor and ridicule and all kinds of unusual figures of speech that really drew people in. So he was a demagogue. He was a tremendous kind of animator of crowds. Initially, during his appearances in Canterbury, he wasn't presenting himself as a particularly religious figure. He was a political figure. He attempted to stand for Parliament on 2 different occasions, once for Canterbury and once for Kent. And it was only after he'd been defeated in those attempts that he became more of a sort of spiritual figure. Unfortunately, at that point, he was also found to be insane and put in a mental asylum.
So what's his unique, we call it his unique selling point? What does he have? What is he offering to his followers? And again, how does this upswell? How is this upswell regarded by, I don't know, local magistrates and the alarmed citizens who perhaps might be in the crosshairs of his followers?
Well, I think initially when he was doing his political campaign in Canterbury, he was offering a return to what he called the good old days of roast beef and nut brown ale and plenty of plum pudding. It was the sort of make Britain great again kind of platform, I suppose, but really drawing on those ideas of old England and merry England, but also supporting the poor. He was always from the very beginning a great supporter of the poor and suggested that all taxes should be removed from them and land and wealth should be given to them. So it was always a sort of a very populist, utopian kind of platform. But then after his period in the mental asylum, when he emerged again and transformed himself into this much more religious, messianic figure, his appeal was really to the labouring people, and it was a much more revolutionary one. He was talking about the great day of judgment that was going to come, the bloody and glorious day when all of his enemies would be laid waste and justice would be delivered to the poor who followed him.
And of course, this is he's got people behind him because this sounds like nut ale and roasts and make Britain great again, etc., etc. It all sort of goes. He's having these rallies, etc. But the local constabulary try and get involved, and I believe the tinder spark, as it were, is that he himself who actually shoots somebody.
Yeah, the magistrates finally get their act together to go and they send a parish constable and his brother around to try and serve an arrest warrant on him for exciting the local population, as they call it. And at this point, Tom, Sir William Courtenay, reacts with sudden violence, shoots the man dead, stabs him several times, and proclaims himself the only saviour of the world, which... At which point you might imagine that his followers would be a little dismayed. But on the contrary, they seem to have found this to be a complete justification of all of his claims.
So obviously they're not going to let him get away with it. What's the reaction of the constabulary, whoever of Parliament? I mean, what is because the things happen very quickly after this, and we get to what we call the last battle on English, the Battle of Bossenden Wood. So explain a little bit about how quickly this escalates and what the battle itself is.
Yeah, so the final campaign, if you like, of this particular event happens over the course of about a week or so, and it gathers pace, as you say, day by day, as slowly the local magistrates start to realise what's going on, and they start summoning help to try and put down what seems to be a revolt in their district. But it happens rather slowly at first because the course of justice is particularly impeded by the regulations of the time. There were only these local magistrates. They only had parish constables to call upon. Everyone had to gallop back and forth on horses in order to tell each other what was going on. So it was a little bit cumbersome. But once it did get started, they were able to send a message to Canterbury, which is the nearest military garrison. And from Canterbury, this detachment of the army, the 45th Foot, marched out to Bossenden Wood, where Tom and his followers had holed up in a clearing in the woods and deployed to crush this revolt as quickly as possible. And they marched into the wood intending to trap Tom and his men in a kind of pincer movement. But rather than being dismayed by this, Tom immediately leapt to his feet, drew his sword and his pistol, and charged at the military detachment, shooting their officer dead.
I mean, you would have thought they would have employed the best sort of tactics, as in run away, because it's the army, and a lot of those guys will have, presumably, they would have fought in campaigns, so it's not just a local militia, is it? So it's professional soldiers, and yet, I think it's this skirmish still leaves, what, is it 8, 9, 10 dead on of the followers?
Yeah, there's 11 people die in all in this. The military officer, one of the constables, is killed. Another of the military officers is very badly injured. And Tom himself, Sir William Courtenay, is shot dead, and 8 of his followers subsequently are either killed at the time or subsequently die of their wounds. So it's quite a bloody little clash. I mean, as you say, it's described as the last battle on English soil, which, I mean, you can take or leave the description. It lasts for about 3 minutes, which doesn't sound very long, but this is 3 minutes of pretty extreme violence, some of the fiercest fighting that many of those present had seen. And as you say, these were professional soldiers. They'd fought, some of them, in the Peninsular War. They'd fought in the Burma War more recently. So the officers, at least, were pretty veteran soldiers. Many of the troops themselves were recent recruits, which possibly explained why the whole thing became so chaotic.
And presumably this was a bit of a cause célèbre, because there's nothing that the media like better than an uprising and, a bit of violence. So this would have sort of shot around the coffee houses or the parlours or whatever else of London and beyond?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. I mean, there were questions asked in the House of Lords that very same evening. Somebody had written directly to London to carry the news. Queen Victoria was told about it the next morning. We hear about in her diary, Lord Melbourne, the Prime Minister, comes to tell her about this terrible uprising and this great violence that's happened in Kent. And it becomes, as you say, a cause célèbre. It's going all around the country. Everybody's talking about it. The Times devoted pages and pages of commentary over the following week to exactly what had happened. And really everybody was wondering how this had come about, how this extraordinary religious fanaticism had appeared apparently from nowhere in the middle of, modern early Victorian England. And yeah, nobody had a particularly good answer to that, other than that these people had been kind of somehow deluded or hypnotized by this charismatic madman.
And is Courtenay actually killed during the engagement, or does he survive?
Yeah, no, he was shot dead probably in the first volley from the soldiers. He was shot with a single bullet through the body and fell onto the ground and apparently said, "I have Jesus in my heart," as he died. Those were his last words. But his body and the bodies of his followers were taken and exhibited in public because there was a rumor, or rather an idea that he'd started himself, that he would actually rise from the dead after 3 days.
Oh, blimey.
So they exhibited his body for a week, I know, in this nearby stable, and thousands of people came from all across the country to look at these bodies. I mean, it sounds just grisly to our way of thinking, particularly because this was late May, early June. It was rather hot. It was rather humid. The conditions in the stable were none too sanitary, and the display was rapidly becoming fairly disgusting. But even so, people wanted to see it, and they wanted to go to the clearing where this battle had happened and gather up souvenirs and bullets and bits of kind of cloth and scraps of blood and things like that. It's almost like holy relics they were gathering.
Well, there is that sort of ghoulish curiosity, isn't there, that crowds always have. That's why you have huge crowds when there are public executions, etc., etc.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, this was one of the things that initially drew me to this story. It starts out sort of almost like a carnival. It's funny, it's colourful, but it descends into this very dark, kind of gruesome, nightmarish, sort of bit of a horror scene, really.
But you see, the thing is, we say this, and I'm not going to get all deep and meaningless on a Monday, but if you think about things like the Waco siege and all those, if they say, oh, it could never happen now, well, we saw that 30 years ago, didn't we, with people following a new Messiah and fighting to the bitter end.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, these figures pop up throughout history, and in a way, I think they stand slightly apart from their own times. I think the figure of John Nichols-Thom, Sir William Courtenay, doesn't seem to sit that well in the early 19th century, and this is probably one of the reasons why I think it's safe to say this is not one of the best-known episodes in British history. But there are, as you say, strong continuities between someone like John Nichols-Thom, somebody like the Waco guy, or somebody like Jim Jones, the Reverend Jim Jones of the Jonestown Massacre. You know, these figures appear throughout history, and they tend to have the same kind of appeal. They're drawing the same kind of people to them.
How difficult was it to research? Because, I mean, I just did a cursory look a couple of days ago, and there are engravings, of the battle. You know, there are engravings of him too. So presumably, it's kind of been, if you scratch the surface, it's there. But in our collective memory, we like to think about Victoriana and steam trains, and again, people emerging from ponds with their shirts dripping.
Yeah, I mean, that was the thing. I mean, a lot of the time I was fighting against my own preconceptions of what was going on at that time. There is actually quite a lot of material, because in the days after this uprising, there were a lot of this is, you know, the great age of early journalism. Dickens was acting as a journalist at the time, and there were people going around interviewing everyone who lived in the area, talking to them about what they remembered, and recording a lot of this stuff. So there's tremendous anecdotal history. There are also letters and accounts written by the people who were present, I mean, mainly on the government side, but they give an entirely different view to it as well. So there was an awful lot that I could look at. It was just a matter of trying to digest all of this huge amount of material and make sense of it, because there's a lot of different versions of the same story that you're hearing after a while.
The book is called Mad Tom's Rising, The Revolutionary Mystic, Sir William Courtenay and the Last Battle Fought on English Soil. It's by Ian Breckon, who we're talking to today. Listeners, you can order it from the virtual bookstore. Ian, if people want to find you online, do you have a, I don't know, Mad Tom Will Rise Again website or something like that?
Unfortunately not. No, I'm not terribly online at the moment. I'm on Facebook. If people want to follow me on Facebook under my name, that's a good way of, you know, finding out what's going on and any events I might be doing and stuff like that. But the book itself is coming out on the 12th of February, and it should be available all over the place, as they say.
Yes, indeed. Well, listen, it's been fascinating to speak to you. You've shone a light on a bit of history that I didn't know about, so congratulations to that. The book is called Mad Tom's Rising. It's by Ian Breckon. Ian, it's been absolutely brilliant to speak to you this morning.
Thanks so much, Giles.